Does antimatter exist? How do they contain it? And what is it used for? These are great questions, of course. However, I think here it would be more appropriate for me to start by actually explaining what antimatter is. And to do that, I think it's best to start by explaining what matter actually is. As you hopefully know, every solid, liquid and gas around you consists of atoms, which are basically the building blocks of matter. At the center of the atoms, there is a nucleus made out of two different particles called protons and neutrons. This nucleus is surrounded by shells of smaller particles known as electrons. So essentially all matter around us consists solely of protons, neutrons and electrons. The interesting thing about electrons and protons though is that they both have charge. Protons have positive charge and electrons have negative charge. Well, what you need to know about charge is that opposite charges attract each other, whereas the same charges repel each other. If you have ever rubbed a balloon against your hair and noticed your hair rising up, or even made it stick to a wall, well, that's because of charge. As you do the rubbing, protons and electrons will be distributed unevenly over the balloon and your hair. The balloon will end up being either positively or negatively charged, and you'll be able to make it stick to anything that has an opposite charge on it. So now to antimatter. Antimatter is essentially the same as normal matter, except that it consists of antiprotons, antineutrons and antielectrons. Antielectrons are also known as positrons. The difference between these particles and their corresponding antiparticles is that their charge is reversed. Antiprotons have negative charge and antielectrons, or positrons, have positive charge. Another property that's reversed for antiparticles is their spin, but that's something I'm going to get into another time. Anyways, what's really interesting here is what happens when particles and antiparticles collide. When, for instance, a particle like an electron and its corresponding antiparticle, a positron, come in contact, the two will annihilate, leaving behind nothing but gamma radiation, or a gamma photon, in other words. In other words, the mass of the two will be converted into pure energy. This is exactly what Albert Einstein's formula E = mc² is all about. You see, the energy released in such a collision will be equal to the mass of the two particles times the speed of light squared. And that's quite a lot, actually. So, that's what antimatter is.